Welcome back. As you can see, I'm putting the finishing touches on the air inlet for the Project Europa airplane, and this means that yes, I have hollowed these blocks already. In the last issue, you may recall, we showed how to carve and sand the blocks to their proper contours. And in this issue, the how-to feature is going to be how to hollow these blocks to a consistent wall thickness. We're going to show how to use router bits and gouges and round sanding drums and various custom sanding tools to achieve this. So it's going to be a relatively simple compared to some of the things we've been through, how-to, but yet it's one for which I've gotten a lot of questions. People really are very hesitant to whack into these blocks with a gouge or a router for some reason. And we're going to explain that and show it in some close-up detail as we always do. But first, we're going to take a road trip to Tucson, Arizona, where we're going to take a look at some of the planes and talk to some of the pilots at the Vintage Stunt Championships number 10. Now, this year, Vintage Stunt Championships was marred by some cold, windy, and wet weather. And because of that, we didn't get enough footage to present a feature tape on VSC 10. So we're going to show you some of the planes, some of the pilots, and maybe even some of the patterns from Tucson. And after that, we're going to come back here where we're going to show you this how-to on block hollowing. And then we're going to welcome back Dean Pappas with his Engine Basics column. Now, Dean has been away for a few issues, and he's had a good reason. He's gotten married, and he was preparing for his nuptials in the previous few months, so he wasn't with us for a while, but he promises to be back on a regular basis now. And Dean's going to be talking about the relationship between glow plugs, nitro, compression ratio, and propellers, and RPM, in order to achieve the type of run we want to achieve, no matter what the weather, no matter how high we are at altitude or how low we are, no matter how humid or how dry it is. He's going to show us the relationship of all those factors and how you can adjust them and work with them to achieve the type of engine run you want to achieve. So, as always, we have a lot of ground to cover, and I think some pretty interesting things this month. So, let's get on the road to Tucson.
gas from Tucson, Arizona. And this is a second generation Viking that I built for the VSC this year. It's a little better than the old one. It runs about 6 ounces lighter, turns a little crisper, flies a little faster. I tried all dope tissue, double tissue paper on the wings, single on the fuselage. The rest of it is all a dope finish. Came in about 43 ounces. Powered by a Super Tiger 46 and runs about 550 square inch wing.
So, back again in Tucson, this lovely place. I call it Stunt Heaven. And last year my flying was not too good, and now I have a new plane which flies not so good as the Squaw I had, so I have a good excuse. But what I didn't think about was that everybody calls and tells me the name of Madman fits to me. Well, okay, I have to deal with this, but I'm so happy to be here and meet all these fantastic guys here helping me, giving me good advice. I just love it. And this VSC, I'm sure will be again, like the third time I'm here now, just to please us all. The motor is OS Max 35S, and the finish is with silk, dope work, and the rest as usual. I just had to cheat a little bit with the wing, because normally the Madman has here a planking. But I didn't have enough wood because I built it up in the mountains in a small condominium, and no way. So I had the choice without this planking and not to finish it to come here, or with the planking and to fly it next year. So I choose to finish it like it is.
I'm Jim Thomerson from Collinsville, Illinois. This is a D'Amico Sport Wing from 1949. It's powered by a Super Tiger G2015 diesel. It's an old-time stunt airplane. This is the third one that I've built, and this one weighs 17 ounces and flies pretty well. I'm able to fly it on 60-foot, 12,000 lines, unless there is a hurricane. It's covered with silk, doped with Aerogloss dope, and the Capital Aeroneers symbol here is, this is a club that I belonged to back in Austin, Texas, back in the 1950s. The landing gear is removable, so that I can fly it over glass without doing 23 loops on the ground when I land. And also, if I ever get around to building a shipping box, it'll be easier to ship. Wingtip weight on one of these is 5 pennies. You don't need an adjustable weight box. This is the third one I've built. The one previous to this one had adjustable lead outs, and that is where the lead outs are supposed to be, so I didn't make adjustable lead outs on this one.
Hello, I'm Henk de Jong. I'm from the Netherlands. I've been flying stunts for a number of years and I finally made it over here to the VSC in Tucson. It's been a great occasion. I really love being here. The model that I'm holding here is an Argus, which was designed by Steve Woolley. And since I've been a Woolley fan, building a version of his Cobra, I just had to build an Argus. I really like the way those 50s planes were constructed too. The way they used the wing construction, the decoder construction. I don't think there's anything better yet that remodelers have concocted. Sorry about that, Bob. I know you love foam wings, but I still really love those Detroiter wings. The only thing I would change in the model of that would be the fuselage construction, which I think would be unnecessarily heavy. Still, I love it. I had have to make it take apart to bring it over to the US. It'll fit into a box about the length of the fuselage span. And I do that by taking off the wing from the fuselage and also the tailplane from the fuselage in two parts. This way I've been able to bring it over without any problem. I've used this construction for about 20 ships now without any problem at all. You can see that by this model, it still weighs 35 ounces even with the take-apart construction.
Hi guys, Tim Meek here, Silmar, California. Not originally, but been out there probably 30 years now. Kind of, as you can see, a Steve Woolley fan. But then Steve and I grew up together, did a lot of flying together back in Ohio and West Virginia, a lot of contests back in the early days. This particular one that I'm holding now is one of Steve's second series designs. This is the 50-inch version. Goes back probably about 1956 in that era. And I just kind of elected to go with the earlier rather than the later versions. I can remember when Steve and I first met down in Parkersburg, West Virginia in the late 40s. We went to a contest together and they wouldn't let us fly until we joined the AMA. Well, as you can see, our numbers are original, only one apart. And from that point, we were very, very close until I had to go into service. So once I got out of the service, then I kind of lost contact.
Hi, my name is Tom Niebuhr. I'm from Blue Ridge, Texas. And this is the fourth or fifth, as far as we can tell, version of the Argus. It went through a long series of development, including some versions that actually had a bubble canopy. This, oddly enough, is the airplane that is pictured in the American Modeler article, but the plans in the article were actually for an earlier version. There's some differences that are quite major. For one, the hinge line is swept forward a ½ inch, similar to the Aries series. The other major difference, if you look right at it, is the squarish wingtips. The wingspan is 52 inches, where the others fell in 49.5 and 50 inches. This one, I worked with Bill Werwidge and John Davis to try to get it as accurate as possible. John Davis drew the drawings from measurements he took from the actual Steve Woolley airplane. In addition to that, Bill Werwidge has the actual airplane in his huge museum collection, and Bill really helped take actual measurements off the airplane so we could get it as close as we possibly could. Before I talk a little bit more, I also want to say that anyone that's building an I-beam wing, you absolutely have to get the Robbins View video of Bill Werwidge building the I-beam wing, and it really shows how to do it, how to make ribs that are accurate, how to make a spar that's going to stay together, and anyone even considering an I-beam, it's a must. It really helps the project. The airplane itself just flies great, and let me just show you a little bit of it. Went to the extreme of even laying the instruments, and the instrument size is exactly the way Bill had it, rather, as Steve had it, rather. And we turn it over. You can see the actual lines, the curvature of the airplane through here is all the same, and the exhaust air outlet way back. It's makes for a real pretty airplane. Likewise, one thing that probably most people who look at the plans for an Argus don't pick up is if you look at the profile of the nose, it actually is higher here than it is here, which also gives it that unique Argus look. So and altogether it's a great flying package. My sincere thanks for all the help from Bill Warwood and John Davis, because this airplane could not have been done without it. Just briefly on the finish, there's very little paint on it. It's built up with clear dope over wood, 2 coats with carbon veil, and about 3 coats of clear over that and some filler. And then DAU colors, the PPG DAU colors, and it goes on very fast, only 2 coats of each and you're done, along with the clear. And it's a great airplane, and thank you for your time.
Hi, I'm Bob Gieske from Irving, Texas. This is my first time out here at VSC. Been wanting to come for a long time, but finally did get to make it. This is as close as I can replicate my 1966 Nobler, which first time I won the Nats was in '66. I just wish it flew as well as that airplane does, but it doesn't. It's got a Fox 35 in it. It's covered with SIG dope, and I'm having a lot of fun, except when I'm standing in the middle of that circle trying to fly.
My name is Bill Warwood, and I'm from Berea, Ohio. This is an airplane that I flew back in the mid-50s. I actually had 3 of these airplanes, 2 I-beams and 1 D-tube. I had a Lancer, several airplanes that were of these same numbers, same dimensions. These particular ones were called the Vulcan, and they were painted quite similar to this. Of course, they were Fox 35 powered, Y&O propellers. And this airplane is about 13 years old or 14 years old. It was built only as a copy of what we did in that time period to see about going back about the good old days and if they really were. I flew it with the old Foxes in it, and I was reasonably happy with them with the Y&O props. But like all things, when you go back to visit, things have changed a little bit, or your memory makes them better than they really were. So consequently, this particular airplane has had a whole series of motors, from a Weber 32, OS 32, the Tiger 40, Tiger 46. It's probably had about 7 or 8 different motors in it. It's been used somewhat as a test bed, although it has won this once and won the Nationals once. Right now it has a Randy Smith Thunder Tiger in it, an AAC that Randy makes a lot of parts for. And I'm just learning this motor, but it's off to what I would consider a very good start. It's 7.5 ounces. It's got a weight advantage over the 46. I'm able to fly it at a lower pitch, and I think the airplane turns a little better. We've really not had much time on this because of the weather back home, but enough time to know that this was on the right track. So I'll be working with this motor now for the foreseeable future. I'm going to put one in the Aries and go from there with that. But this is primarily just a lot of old numbers with big flaps and things we did in that time frame.
I'm David Fitzgerald from Napa, California. This is a Sterling Ringmaster designed by Matt Kania. It's just a stock Ringmaster with a Vico 19 ball bearing with the original stock muffler. The weight is 28 ounces, and I was here at the Vintage Stunt 10 and flew it in both old time and classic today. It flies very well. Secret to Ringmaster is keeping it very light, and the finish is all SIG dope, and it turned out very nicely. I'm real happy with it. Had a good time this year.
Hi, I'm Don Hutchinson. I live in Mansfield, Texas. Okay, this aircraft is the Stearman as painted by Sammy Mason, which was an actual airplane right after World War II. He flew this in air shows all around the country. This particular model is powered by an OS-40 FP. It's kind of hopped up to perform better than a scale model. I left the rigging out between the wings and the tail, and I did a few other things to lighten it up. Came out 40.8 ounces, and I think it's going to fly quite well. It's got an OS-40, could use a little more horses, but at 40 ounces it should be okay.
Okay, my name is Floyd Carter, and I'm from Los Altos, California in the San Francisco Bay Area. Okay, this model is called Wildman 60. It was designed in 1950, and I am the designer. My first model was designed and built in 1950, and it flew in the Plymouth regional contest in Los Angeles. I was 16 years old at the time. This is the second model. This one was built a couple of years ago from the plans that I saved. It's powered by an Orwick 64 engine on spark ignition, and flies very well.
Hi, I'm Jim Hoffman from Mesa, Arizona, and I'm here at VSC with my Talon. The Talon was built 5 years ago in 1993. It's powered with an OS-40 FP. It's all built up construction, and the wing was built using the lost foam method, very successful this time. The airplane is covered with a 1,000th Mylar film, and over that is a one coat of primer and then one coat of black epoxy paint, and the rest is trim. Very lightweight finish. It's been a pretty successful airplane for me, and I hope it keeps on trucking.
My name's Steve Fauble. I'm from Denton, Texas, down here at VSC. This model is, the name is on it, it's Trolley Lajasi Model Tringawi, which loosely translated means robust aerobatic trainer. It's from a April 1951 Polish magazine, Wings and Motors, and it is all built out of hardwood because that's what the kit had to say, or the plans said, and it has a AMD 15 Russian diesel on it, and it is severely tail heavy at the moment. But there is no balsa wood in the construction whatsoever. It's plywood, basswood, spruce. Fairly decent design, actually.
Hello, my name is Robert Brookins, and I'm from Des Moines, Iowa. This is a Ringmaster Imperial, and this was built from a kit. All the colors on this basically were started with SIG dope. I've added pearls. I have two different colors of blue pearl, yellow pearl, a red pearl, and orange pearl over some red. This has a L&J Fox 35. I was unfortunate enough not to have enough time to pre-fly this, so I brought it out to show people. The engine runs great. Plane weighs 43 ounces, and I'm hoping it flies very well, and I hope you enjoy looking at it.
Hi, I'm Bob Hunt from Stockertown, Pennsylvania. This is my Frisky Pete airplane. I'm flying an old-time stunt. And this airplane was designed by S. Calhoun Smith, one of the most famous modelers back in the 40s and 50s. And Cal published this airplane in a book called How to Build Model Aircraft. It was put out by Popular Mechanics. And the Frisky Pete weighs 22 ounces. It's powered by a Fox 25, which was reworked by my friend Tom Hampshire. It features polyspan covering, and I used their aniline dye mixed with thinner and sprayed that right over the polyspan. and then I put on the trim with auto body paint, and then a coat of Imron to make it really old-time spirit. And the Frisky Pete also features adjustable lead outs. It has adjustable tip weight box. It has removable landing gear, and it flies like it's on rails.
Hi, my name is Ray Perkins. I'm from Bakersfield, California. This is my Sterling Ringmaster designed by Matt Kania. It's built completely from a Sterling kit with no wood substitutions other than the motor mounts, a McCoy 35, and all finished with SIG dope, and weighs 28 ounces, flying on a BYNO 10.6 prop.
Hello, my name is Todd Lee. I'm from Topeka, Kansas. And today I have with me a double whammy designed by Walton Hughes, published in the 1952 Air Trails Annual, powered by a Fox 35. This model was built by my father, James Lee, powered by a Fox 35 Stunt, weighing approximately 29 ounces, all balsa, dope, and tissue, SIG ply span with SIG dope. All of the checkerboards were hand done. There's quite a few on there, and I'm sure he spent many spare evenings scratching his head and complaining about checkerboard, but it presents very well in the air. There's a polished Froome 1 3/4 spinner on it with an authentic top flight propeller. The spark system in it, if you notice, there is no hole in the top of the cowl to get to the glow plug, and you can see a glow plug in the cockpit of the airplane. We hook the battery up to the extra glow plug. There are leads that go to the engine to ignite the system. This makes for a very clean cowl, and this is the way the original was done. Something you don't see every day, but it sure looks neat, and it works.
Okay, my name is Dennis Schote, and I live in Huntington Beach, California. This is a plane that was designed in 1947 and went to the Nats. It was designed by Bud Jameson, and in the Charles Mackey book on Control Line, it's got a full page on it saying it was his favorite airplane. Originally was ignition, had an Oryx 64, and it's just a great plane. Love it dearly.
Hi, I'm Bill Netzaban from Murrieta, California. The airplane you're seeing now is the Aeromodeling. This is an authentic scale, dead scale model. I worked my little tail off to make it exact, of the Davies 1946 championship airplane. It pretty well defines the old-time pattern with 60-degree maneuvers. It weighs 51 ounces, and I was careful with the wood. Luckily, it's into the Slagle spec because it's somewhere between 3 pounds and 4 pounds according to the book. The engine is a Super Cyclone replica from Apollo Motors. Runs like a watch. Runs much better than the Cyclones I had when I was a kid. We had quite a story trying to get the authentic paint scheme for this. We've asked people like Bob Palmer and folks who were at the meet. Nobody remembers what color it was. So we got Bob Arnett to agree it might be red and white. I wanted to make it red and white, and if it wasn't red and white, it should have been.
Well, welcome back from Tucson. I sure hope you enjoyed that. I've been going out to Tucson now for the last 9 years, ever since they've had it in Tucson. The original VSC, VSC-1, was held in Riverside, California. And I just wouldn't miss it. That contest every year reminds me of what model airplane flying is all about, and that's having fun and enjoying each other's company and seeing some really great old airplanes. And try to make it to Tucson if you possibly can. You won't regret it. It's a great weekend, and one weekend out of the last 9 years we've been going there has had bad weather. So I think the odds are pretty good that next year we're going to get good weather again, especially if El Nino passes along. Well, it's time now to get to the hollowing of these fuselage blocks. And as you can see, I'm still here touching up the shapes of these blocks. And I could probably sand on this fuselage for another week, being very critical and finding minor little tiny things, but there comes a point when you have to say, well, that's where we're going to stop. And this one is actually in pretty good shape. All the contours seem to be about even. There's no high or low spots as I candle it against the incandescent light as we showed you in the last issue, and it looks pretty good. Now, even when we get the blocks hollowed and then reattached to the fuselage after the wing and tail have been installed, there's still an opportunity to modify the shapes to a degree. Some of the, you're going to find inevitably when you glue it down, you're going to find some shapes you're not happy with. And for that reason, we don't hollow the fuselage blocks out to paper thinness. I recommend hollowing the blocks, at least in the past, down to about a nominal 1/8 inch or just under an 1/8 inch wall thickness. Nowadays, I actually hollow them a little bit more because, as we discussed in the last issue, the availability of the 2/10 ounce carbon veil has made it much more viable to hollow these thinner. And when you cover them with the 2/10 veil, it solidifies everything so hard and so permanently that you're never going to get a soft spot because you went too thin. That doesn't mean you shouldn't try not to get down to paper thinness. You should try to maybe keep your minimum thickness around a 1/16 of an inch. But if you get down in some areas to a 32nd of an inch where you know it's really thin, don't panic, because the carbon fiber veil will stiffen those areas up. I would caution you not to try to make the whole block like that, however. Well, in a few minutes here, what we're going to do is we're going to pop these blocks off. We only tack glued the blocks, just spots of CA in strategic places. And actually, this top block is already popped from working on it. It's already loose and tending to want to come off here in one spot. So I think these blocks are going to pop off relatively easily. Now, I use a single edge thin razor blade, and I run it down the seam. I try to pop one area up and run it down the seam and pop the glue joints as I go along. And generally, this is not a problem. You want to try to avoid breaking out sections of the block because that will cause need for filler later on. And filler is adds weight, and it's just not the proper way to do things if you can get around it. And when we get these blocks off, we're going to scribe a line around the perimeter of the block, approximately 1/8 inch from the edge. And this will give us a guideline from which to hollow. And we're going to actually begin hollowing using X-Acto or XL brand routers and chisels and gouges. Now, I have some laid out here on the bench, and you can see them in the close-up camera. This is the X-Acto blade handle that I use, and you notice it's fitted with a router bit. This is the largest router bit that XL or X-Acto make. And on this side of the handle are the other routers that I use. I use this small round one quite often, and even this kind of trapezoidal shaped one here quite often. I rarely use this chisel end one, but there are places where it's handy. And on the other side of the blade here, on the side of the handle, we have the gouges, and I use this gouge quite often. This is probably these two tools, this tool here, this router, large router bit, and this gouge are the two tools I use most often in hollowing the blocks. When I get into very confined areas, I will use this very narrow 1/8 inch gouge to get into areas. I like this on solid balsa wingtips in particular, when you're trying to get the maximum amount of wood out, and at the rear of the tip where it gets very, very narrow, this works quite well. And again, the chisel here, I don't use it very often, but there are places where it does come in handy. So this range of hollowing tools is generally what I use and what I recommend for hollowing out blocks. Now you can also use a Dremel tool fitted with one of the Robart carbide bits, or with just a regular Dremel routing bit. And a lot of people prefer to do that. I don't. I like to use the hand tools. I feel that they get the material out quicker and much more controllable. If you slip with a high RPM router, the chances are you're going to put a hole in the block. And it's also very, very dusty. And if you do decide to go with the Dremel route fitted with a bit, you might want to consider trying to do this outside so you don't get dust all over your shop, because it will throw dust everywhere. And with the cameras in here in particular, I don't like to use that method. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to start, again, hollowing with these routers and these chisels and these gouges and so forth. And we'll show you that in time-lapse as we go along. But in order to achieve the proper wall thickness, we have to have some way of gauging how thick the wall is. We have to find some way of knowing, as we're going with the hollowing procedure, that we're not going too thin or leaving too much material. And the way I achieve that, or way I do that, is I use a reflector fitted with a 100-watt light bulb, and I actually mount that to my bench, and I hold the block between myself and the light bulb. And then as I'm hollowing, I can see, as I get close to the proper wall thickness, I can start to see light through the block. And I generally try to make it a kind of a pink color. Most of the time when you get down to around 1/8 of an inch wall thickness, you'll see a sort of a pinkish color come through the block. As you continue hollowing, it'll get more and more light colored, white colored, or balsa colored. And if you get too close to the surface of the block, the outside surface, it'll get almost to the point where you can see the light at the normal color of the light shining through the block, and then you know you've gone too thin. So by holding the blocks up in front of the light and hollowing and being very careful as you go, you shouldn't have a problem in achieving the proper wall thickness throughout the entire length of the block. And we'll show that again in time-lapse. Many people prefer to hollow out and leave former sections in the block. In other words, where there's a former in the fuselage, they like to leave balsa wood in the block, and so they hollow between sections. They hollow sections between formers and leave the balsa former in the block. I don't like to do that. I like to hollow out the entire block and then fit sheet balsa formers where required later on. I think they're stronger because of the grain direction. You can do cross grain at that point, and they're lighter because you can use a piece of wood that's exactly the same thickness as the former it's going to sit atop. So for that reason, I like to hollow out the entire block and then fit the formers in later. The only place I do different is up here in the nose. Between former F2 and the nose section, I do leave the block material in there. And I don't know why. I just have always done that, and I always feel more comfortable doing that. I do hollow the block forward of F2 quite a bit. Now, if you're using an engine that vibrates quite a lot, you might want to consider leaving a little more than an 1/8 inch wall thickness in this area. You might want to consider 3/16, or if it's a real high vibration motor, you might even want to consider 1/4 inch. But in this case, these Schnurlies we're running run so smooth and so with so little vibration that I feel comfortable taking the front of this block out to the same wall thickness as I would in the rear here. And I'll do that as I go along. So it's time now to actually pop these blocks off and mark the perimeter for the hollowing, and time to get started taking the material out of the inside of the blocks. Now we're going to do the top and bottom block here in this first section of time-lapse, and then we're going to come back live and talk a little bit more about the cowl block, because the cowl block has some special things about it that we need to discuss. So we'll do the bottom block and the top block, and then we'll come back here and discuss the cowl block, and then go ahead and do the cowl block. Let's get to it. Note, one of the tack glue joints on the top block is already loose. Use a single edge razor blade to pop the remainder of the tack glue joints as shown in this sequence. Repeat this procedure for the bottom block and the cowl block. With a pen, tick mark the position of former F2 on both sides of the top block, and then transfer these marks to the bottom face of the block. Using the pad of your middle finger as an edge gauge, hold the pen as shown and adjust by sliding the pen up or down. Now scribe a mark 1/8 inch in from the edge as shown in this sequence. Use a straight edge to connect the tick marks at station F2 as shown here. Mark the front and rear of the block as shown for hollowing. Using a very sharp number 11 blade, cut vertically down into the block at the F2 station as shown. Be very careful not to cut too deep and go through the top of the block. Mount the large router into the knife handle and begin hollowing the forwardmost area of the top block. Be very careful not to cut into the area that will sit atop former F2. Hollow carefully, being certain not to let the wall get too thin at this time. Now mount the light to the edge of the bench and continue hollowing while watching for light coming through the block. This light will indicate that the wall is beginning to get thin. You are looking for a constant 3/32 to 1/8 inch wall at this point. Note the pink color here. This is approximately what you are looking for. Hollow the block aft of the F2 station in the same manner as you did the front section. Note, you will break through the block in the canopy area because the block is not as thick there. This is normal, so don't panic. The top block gets very narrow in the aft end, and the larger router bit will not fit. Change to the smaller diameter bit to hollow this area. Do the final hollowing with the light as before. Switch again to the small router bit to finish hollow the rear section of the block. Mark the perimeter of the cockpit opening for the desired wall thickness with a pen as shown in this sequence. Using a sharp number 11 blade knife, cut out and trim the cockpit opening as shown here. Invert the block and use the large router bit to achieve a constant wall thickness at the cockpit opening area. Here's the finished hollowing job on the top block. I use spindle sander drums in various grits and diameters to sand the inside of the block smooth. Use a small diameter drum to get as much weight as possible out of the rear end of the block. Using a large diameter fine grit drum, carefully sand the edges of the cockpit area. Now, edge mark the bottom block for just a bit thicker wall than the top block and repeat the hollowing and sanding procedures. Well, that's how we hollow out the top and bottom blocks. Now you want to take your time, especially in the rear section of the blocks, and get out every last grain you possibly can. Not just grams, grains. Each of these blocks hollowed weighs 1/2 ounce. That's 14 grams. Now I neglected to weigh them prior to starting to hollow, but as you can see here in front of me, there's quite a pile of chips, and this pile of chips amounts to, oh, I'd say 2 or 3 ounces at least of chips. So you can see that you take out quite a bit of weight out of one of these blocks as you're hollowing them. And as you can see too, we left in that the piece at F2 that corresponds to former F2. We left a bridge of balsa wood in here. And I'd be lying to you if I told you that I didn't go through in hollowing on almost every block that I've done in my entire life, or every set of blocks. And I did on this one too. I got a little carried away, even though I was watching critically for the thickness by using the light. I still managed to put the gouge through right here in the front of the block. If this happens, just try not to actually break the piece out. If the gouge actually goes through the wall, stop, push the piece back in place, and put a little bit of thin CA in the on the block, and it will seal that piece in place. And then you can sand it, and if need be, you can put a little bit of filler on the outside later. This was more critical years ago when we used the silk span on the outside of the fuselage, but now that we're using the carbon veil, these little glitches virtually disappear, so it's not too much of a problem. As we showed, we opened up the cockpit area, and I've fine sanded that, and you can continue to fine sand that to get whatever shapes you want, and that's a personal preference thing. And again, as you can see, we've taken off the plywood templates that we used to create the lands for the fin and the scoop, as we showed in the last issue. Now the bottom block, I've taken a little bit more care in hollowing. Now this block gets more handling and is more prone to damage than the top block. The top block is rarely handled. So the bottom block, and in this case being a bottom block which will house a tune pipe, I decided to try to make this just fairly thicker in wall thickness than the top block. I took the top block down to 3/32 in most areas, and actually under 3/32 in some areas. And again, with the carbon veil, the 2/10 carbon veil, that's not a problem. That will stiffen that fuselage up quite well. And I'm also going to use a 2/10 carbon veil on the bottom block too, but I wanted to leave a slightly thicker wall thickness here, so I'm probably at 3/32 to 1/8 on this block. Be critical again at the rear of both blocks, and get out as much wood as you possibly can. Where these taper down, it's harder to get in there, but this is the most critical part. The weight at the extremities, especially in the tail. If you can get out a grain in the back, do it. If you can take an extra gram out of the block from here back in a 10G pullout, and our airplanes pull significantly higher than 10 Gs, I'm told, that 1 gram would become 10 grams, or a little over 1/3 of an ounce. So I would be very careful to make sure you got all the weight you possibly could get out of the rear section of the blocks. And again, remember, these blocks are basically for aesthetic purposes. They're performance shape. And when they are glued to the fuselage crutch structure, they and covered with the 2/10 carbon veil, they form a monocoque, and they have a tremendous amount of strength, even at a very thin wall. So you can take quite a bit of wood out of these and get them down to the point where they almost seem flimsy prior to installing them on the crutch, and they're still just fine. Again, the only caveat to that would be in the area right around the cowl block, which we're going to talk about in a minute, and the bottom block area, especially if you have a tuned pipe in there. You want to make that maybe just a little bit more robust. Now we're going to get on to the cowl block. And as I just mentioned, this is an area where you pick up the airplane. You're always grabbing the airplane under the cowl block and lifting it. This gets a lot of abuse, and constantly taking it on and off and so forth, and fuel filler vents and so forth, you're attaching things. It always gets a lot of abuse. I would be very careful here not to hollow the cowl block quite as much as we did the top and bottom block. And in this case, I would leave it a good 1/8 inch wall thickness, maybe even 5/32 inch wall thickness in the bottom of the bottom block. It's hollowed in precisely the same manner as the top block and bottom block, but as you remember, last issue we showed how to put this plywood cap on the front, the shape of the air opening, the air inlet, and we're going to have to bust through that using a Dremel tool, and then we're going to open that up to about a 1/16 inch perimeter using a Dremel drum sander. Now this is, you work very carefully with this Dremel tool. As we mentioned before, it's very easy to take too much. So you want to brace yourself up, and we'll show that technique. And you want to make sure that you get it out to an even wall thickness, so you have an even shape all the way around. And basically this is a job you do by eye. You have to look and gauge by eye if you're getting the wall thickness perfect. I imagine you could go ahead and draw on here the wall thickness, but I just rely on my eye and looking at it very critically to get a good opening, and we'll show that as we go along. So let's go ahead now and hollow out the cowl block. Edge mark the cowl to a 3/16 nominal wall thickness. Using the large router bit, hollow the cowl in the same manner as you did the top and bottom blocks. In the case of the cowl, you should barely be able to see light through the block. Fit your Dremel hand grinder with a medium grit sanding drum and begin sanding through the 1/32 inch plywood piece in the front of the cowl. Work slowly and carefully with the grinder and begin forming a 1/16 inch wall to the plywood piece. Here's what the finished opening should look like after shaping with the sanding drum. Finish sand the plywood piece to blend into the cowl shape, and then finish hollowing the inside of the cowl around the opening. Sand the interior of the blocks with the sanding drum. Here's the finished cowl. That pretty much completes the hollowing procedure for the blocks, the top block, the bottom block, and the cowl block. And as we showed, we opened up this plywood piece on the nose of the cowl, the shape of the air inlet, and we opened that up to a very thin wall thickness, approximately, in this case, 1/32 of an inch in places. And it's nice and crisp and has a nice shape to it. And because it's so thin and so fragile at that point, even though it's plywood, I went ahead and I toughened up the entire area there by saturating it with thin CA. And I recommend that you do that. It really doesn't add that much weight, and it adds a tremendous amount of strength. And later on, when we put the carbon veil over this and sand it all in, that'll be a nice crisp shape that will last for the life of the airplane. So again, we left a fairly thick wall as compared to the other blocks we hollowed, the top and bottom block. And we may take a little bit more out of this cowling at a later time when we're fitting it to the fuselage, when we're installing the hold downs. But because we're not exactly sure of where the hold downs are going to go, we wanted to leave a little bit of excess meat in this cowl block. And we may take some out later. And we'll also finish sand the interior of the block to a very smooth surface, and then coat it with some sort of an epoxy resin to prevent it from getting fuel saturated. So that takes care of the blocks. And as you can see here, we've actually mounted the top and bottom block to the crutch, and the cowl block fits in place very nicely here. And of course, this will require some gluing later when we put the blocks in place and sanding and so forth, and we'll cover that at a later time. But this fuselage crutch with blocks and cowl block weighs 5 ounces. Now that's pretty good, considering we have all this beefing in the nose here, the cross-grain piece between the mounts and so forth, and the plywood doublers and the stiffener in the bottom of the tank compartment, as we showed 2 issues ago. So this is a pretty good deal, and I'm very pleased with it. Next issue, we're going to be installing the wing into the fuselage, and that's one of the more critical points in any model airplane, is the alignment of the wing and fuselage and stabilizer to the wing and fuselage. Prior to accomplishing that, I have to install the flaps on the Project Europa wing. I haven't gotten that far yet. And I'm going to do that as we described in Volume 2, Number 2, the hinging, and also I'm going to build a control horn to mount into the flaps according to those instructions we showed in that issue. Now, one of the things I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to taper my flaps. I'm going to actually have to take the 1/4 inch flaps that I've cut out here, and I'm going to have to taper them from 1/4 inch at the leading edge to 1/8 inch at the trailing edge. And that's a 1/16 of an inch taper on either side. I want the 1/8 inch to be in the center, not at the bottom of the flap. So in order to do that, I'm going to use what's commonly referred to as the rod method of sanding. Now, most of you are already familiar with this method, and I'm sure most of you have tried it, or at least have heard about it. But for those of you who haven't, I'm going to go quickly through it here so you can see how easy it is to establish a perfect 1/16 inch taper on either side, even though these flaps are tapered in plan form. And I've tried this several times now, and it's worked very well each time. I can do this by hand. I can lay out the lines on the back of the flap and carve it and sand it by eye and get just the exact type of results. But it takes longer, and there's no reason not to cut some time out of the building if we're not cutting accuracy out at the same time, and in this case we're not. So let's go ahead now and take a brief look at how to taper flaps using the rod method. Lay the 1/4 inch thick flap blank between the 1/4 inch diameter rod and the 3/16 inch diameter rod. Note, the 1/4 inch diameter rod lays against the leading edge of the flap, and the 3/16 inch diameter rod lays against the trailing edge of the flap. Using a number 26 Whittler's blade, begin carving away some of the material between the 2 rods. Do not try and carve the wood flush with the rods at this time. When satisfied with the carving job, sand the flaps with a T-bar sander fitted with 220 grit sandpaper. Sand until the T-bar hits both rods. I like to use a straight edge to check the taper as shown. Now, turn the flap over and position the 1/8 inch diameter rod against the trailing edge and reposition the 1/4 inch diameter rod against the leading edge. Repeat the carving and sanding process on this flap side. Finish sand the surface of the flaps with a T-bar sander fitted with 320 grit sandpaper. Here are the finished flaps. Note the perfect taper on both sides. This is an easy and quick method to produce accurate flaps. That's a pretty neat trick, isn't it? By using the 1/4 inch music wire at the leading edge of the 1/4 inch flap, and then the 3/16 music wire for the first cut, yielding a 1/16 inch taper, and then flipping over the flap and using the 1/8 inch to the 1/4 inch rod for the second part of the taper, you get a perfectly tapered flap from 1/4 inch thick at the leading edge to 1/8 inch thick at the trailing edge. Now obviously if you want to do different size flaps, 3/8 or 5/16 or whatever, you're going to have to do the math and come up with what size music wire you need for the first and second cuts. At any rate, that's how that works, and we're pretty happy with the finished results. And I'm going to go ahead now and I'm going to install these flaps and hinge them as we showed in volume 2 number 2. And next time we come back, we're going to put this wing into the fuselage. See you then.
Well, hello there, and welcome to a long overdue installment of Engine Basics. I've been away for a while, but properly busy. And now that I'm back, I'd like to approach a subject that, well, it's real important to us in stunt. Let's face it, the weather changes, but what we want to do doesn't. And as a matter of fact, as the weather changes, sometimes the demands on our horsepower and engine behavior become even more stringent. For example, when the wind blows real strong and steady, runway wind, that's what we call it, you need more braking coming downhill. You need not only more horsepower, but more ability to prevent whip up and runaway. And when the air is dead, you just need plenty of horsepower. Braking is usually not the issue. When it gets real hot, almost any setup that works properly, whether it be a classic 2/4 stunt setup or a tune pipe setup, is susceptible to runaway. That is, the engine picks up speed in one of the maneuvers, warms up a bit, and just stays fast. And that's a real problem. So what we'd like to do is talk about the 3 basic ingredients you juggle. Those being the glow plug temperature range, the compression of the engine, head shims, and the nitro content of the fuel. There is one big difference between this installment of Engine Basics and any of the others we've done in the past. That is, the table's clean, I don't have any engine parts or grease on my hands, and I'm not wielding a blowtorch. Some of you may be comforted by that fact. What we're going to do is more of a classroom session, exploring the relationships between the three things that I just mentioned and engine ignition timing and engine heat. My weapon for this will be a magic marker and an easel. I'll draw a couple of graphs and explain the relationships between these things. What I'd like to do is let you know that this is not going to be a terribly long session, and we're not going to turn you into the world's greatest expert on this. Our goal in this installment is just to arm you with the basic relationships between the important variables that affect an engine run and enable you, or in 90s speak, empower you, to go out and do a couple of these experiments at the flying field. That's where real learning takes place. So with that in mind, I'm going to go off camera, go get my drawing paper and pencil, and I'll be right back. All right, what we have here are a list of some of the basic relationships and interrelationships that happen when you change the variables that affect the model airplane engine run. Those variables, once again, are compression ratio, nitromethane content, glow plug selection, and I've included a byproduct of all three of those, the ignition timing of the engine, when the fire actually starts. Let's start with the last of these, because like I said, he's a consequence of all the other three. Ignition timing. Earlier ignition timing, whatever its cause may be, usually produces more horsepower and more heat. Excessively early timing will actually start to produce less horsepower. Why? Because the early ignition is now starting to push down on the piston while it's trying to come uphill for the compression stroke. And this condition of firing too early against the compression stroke means lots of heat doing nothing constructive at least, which heats up the engine some more, which goes back to here, moves the ignition timing even earlier. The condition, it's a positive feedback kind of deal. The condition is known as runaway. And you've all seen it. Everyone who's ever tried to learn to fly stunt has been there, right? Later ignition timing usually runs cooler and almost always makes less horsepower. That's it for the first page. What I'm going to try and do is go through all of these basic relationships in one pass. I can tell you right now, from having rehearsed this, that the temptation to start describing the interrelationships as I go is very strong, and if I start to do it, well, you'll understand that that's the way the subject is structured. It doesn't cut up into nice, neat little pieces. Okay, fuel mixture, or the needle valve setting. Now, anyone who's involved in stunt knows that even world peace could be solved with the right needle valve setting, right? I mean, it's that important. Lean, and I'm not talking about very lean, I'm talking just leaner than the ideal, leads to hotter engine temperatures, more power, as long as you don't overdo it, earlier ignition timing, tied together with more power, and less brake. I'll discuss brake in a moment. Richer needle valve settings run cooler, also save on engine expense. You wear stuff out a lot less fast. Less power, with a question mark, owing to the retarded ignition timing, and have more brake, once again with a question mark. I do want to digress for just a moment and discuss these two question marks here. Rich mixtures, if you need one to get the engine to run correctly, are usually a consequence of running a little bit more compression ratio. Here I am hopping across the page now, exactly what I didn't want to do. Rich mixtures are usually forced by running a little bit more compression ratio, which moves the ignition timing up, but if you fatten up the needle, you can retard the timing. And what you've bought is a very nice situation. More engine life and much more fuel, more highly compressed in a cooler running engine. Sounds like a pretty good deal all around. Doesn't always work that way. The result is you have the ability to make more horsepower and change the horsepower you're producing more dramatically as a function of engine temperature and how much load you've put on the engine. And that's what I mean by more brake. Generally, highly compressed, richer needle valve settings will produce more difference in horsepower between when you pull the nose up to do, say, the beginning of the squares or up at the top of the circle in the overheads versus the horsepower coming downhill, say on the backside of the consecutive rounds. Less brake here, in the case of a leaner mixture and everything adjusted to suit it, usually means that there's less room for the engine to make more horsepower because when it heats up, there's less fuel to burn. Let's move on to compression ratio. Once again, the two basic choices, more or less. Sounds like everything else in life, doesn't it? More compression ratio usually means more power. It moves the ignition point up, like we said, and it makes the brake more abrupt. Why? Because compression ratio affects the instantaneous heating of the gases in the cylinder. The more compression you have, the more additional heat every compression stroke adds to the gases in the cylinder above and beyond the temperature of the engine metal. So this compression-related heating can change quickly, where the thermal mass of the engine tends to moderate engine temperatures, tends to keep the temperature and the ignition point from changing quickly. So these are affecting engine temperature, engine metal temperature, rich and lean needle settings, more and less compression ratio, changing the amount of heating due to compression that you can get, which is a very quick responding deal. The other side of the compression equation, less compression means less horsepower. We have ways to fix this one, by the way. Why? Because the ignition is later, as we described, and it softens the brake. The exact opposite of the abrupt brake here. If I have less compression, I'm depending upon compression heating to do less and less of my ignition determining temperature setting. Now, I said that very quickly. It's really quite a complicated relationship. So if you don't feel comfortable with this, hang on a while, because we're going to go through this whole subject in summation. And more importantly, what we'll do is give you some experiments to try with your airplane that will make this relationship here, the harder brake, the softer brake, come alive for you, I hope, at the field. Okay, the last variable that we can actually do something with is the glow plug selection. You have two basic selections, hot and cold, and depending on the manufacturer of the glow plug, about 453 choices in between, and usually some extra special hot selection at this end of the scale called special or go and blow or something silly like that, and some sort of a selection way off of the cold end of the scale, which is very often labeled for high nitro and racing use, which is probably useless for us. Hot glow plugs, for the most part, behave like more nitromethane, somewhat like more compression, but there's an important difference here. The glow plug that's built to be hot has a skinny little element, a fine element. Because it doesn't have much thermal mass, it changes its temperature easily or quickly. So if you have a combination that seems to run at the right temperature range, but the engine doesn't cool down quickly enough, you can actually change it by putting a hotter glow plug in and then compensating for the hotter glow plug with either less nitro or a richer needle valve setting. or less compression ratio. Same side, or the other side of the same equation, cold glow plugs do all of this in opposite, but that's not what you use them for. The reason you use a colder glow plug is to try and get rid of an over-advanced or pre-ignition condition. This most often shows up as a slight horsepower loss or flatness in the horsepower and feel of the model during the overheads or during the square horizontal eights, where the engine is running with a big load and elevated temperature for 10, 15, 20 seconds. The way it does this is a cold glow plug limits the amount of timing advance you can get, even though you heat the engine metal up. Okay? The colder, thicker element doesn't start the fire as quickly, is what it boils down to. Okay? Now, let's go look at the last piece of this and tie it all together with a couple of rules that you can use at the field. I like nitromethane. 2 reasons. It smells good, and it's easy to change. I just tip the fuel can. Actually, I like nitro for 3 reasons. It allows me to spend my money. Remember, the only hobby in the world is spending money. Everything else, whether it's race cars or stunt or any other bad habit you can think of, is just details. Spending money is the real activity. More nitro. What does it do? Well, typically you use nitro to compensate for the fact that you went to a field at higher altitude. Why? Because nitromethane, when you burn it, makes its own air. Actually, what it does is release oxygen as it burns. So it's like pouring air in the fuel tank for when you go to a field where there isn't any air in the sky. That happens if you go to Reno, Nevada. That happens if the barometer has dropped way low, and if the humidity has gone way up. By the way, all of these conditions also lead to a long engine run, which, using more nitromethane, forces you to open the needle valve, cures your long engine run. So in real life, what you might do is, if you notice that your engine runs have gotten longer at this field, and you're probably down on horsepower, if you tip the can and pour more nitro in until you get the same engine run time, or until you get the same amount of fuel for your 8-minute flight, everything should be back where you started. Less nitro, you use it on cool, dry, high barometer days, if you have enough compression ratio, if the airplane is light, and if you don't want to spend as much money for your fuel. Now, time to start tying things together here. I've noted here under more nitro that you can also use it when you have decompressed the engine in order to make the engine run more mellow. Now, it's time for me to go back and flip a couple pages and show you where that ties in. Remember, we're decompressing and pouring nitro in. First, if I added nitro, I could go to a colder plug. That tends to keep temperature more easily. Remember, the hot plug changes quickly, the cold plug doesn't. I flip back here to page 1. More nitro allows me to set the needle valve richer, make the same horsepower. I'm sorry, that's page 2. More nitro allows me to run richer without losing horsepower. That's why this question mark was there. That gets me further away from this runaway condition, because running the needle valve rich means that even though I'm making more power because of the nitro, I'm running fairly cool. The ignition timing is later. I'm further away from runaway. And what's more, when I do load up the engine, what will happen is it will heat up, make more horsepower very quickly, because the nitro makes its own heat and own oxygen. And as long as I don't overdo it, I won't have a runaway condition. Now, if you do have that runaway condition, the reason is the compression is too high. Let's go back to compression. Remember, compression changes the abruptness or softness of the brake. The reason it does it is, the reason that compression can change the brake to being quick or slow is that it controls the portion of the engine timing and heat generation that is tied to how quickly you squeeze the gases, the mixture. That's the basic relationship. Now let's see if we can tie it together in something that looks a little bit more coherent. A couple of experiments for you to do at the field. I realize this seems somewhat disjoint. It's not an easy subject to describe all in one shot. All right, I just sat here and tried to write down a short, concise list of experiments for you to do at the flying field that would give you a real good handle on all of the variables. And I realized that there were probably something like 36 of them. And that's not going to work. Let me suggest these 4 basic experiments and a couple of ideas to try. First thing to do, once you've got a setup that's working reasonably well, is just try adding nitromethane and then richening the needle valve to get a nice stunt run. If it takes you 3 or 4 flights to learn how to set the needle with more nitromethane, say 20% or 25% instead of 10 or 15, that's okay. But once you get the needle valve right, evaluate what it does to the flight. I think what you'll find is that the horsepower highs will be higher and the brake or the slowdown will be deeper. And that's an interesting thing to see. Combination number 2 is just the opposite of number 1. Drop down on nitro. That will probably force you to run a little bit leaner on the needle valve in order to get the kind of run that you want, where the airplane goes through all the maneuvers. And this is a good combination if the airplane's very light and doesn't need much more horsepower while going uphill. 3 and 4, once again, are another pair that go together, and that is add a head shim. By adding a head shim, you're going to reduce horsepower and soften the brake. So you might add nitromethane, you might put a hotter plug in when you do this in order to make it possible to set the needle valve so that you can get an entire flight in. Number 4, once again, compress up the engine by taking an extra head shim out if you have an extra one to take out of the engine. Some you only have 1 head shim. And when you take that head shim out, you will find that the engine gets touchier instead of friendlier, as in the case with number 3. You won't be able to run as much nitro. The difference between a rich and an overly lean needle valve setting will become much more narrow. But if you can juggle this one, the change in horsepower, uphill versus downhill, will become much more dramatic and will come on much harder. So if you have a heavy airplane, you might want to try this. Those are the basic experiments to try. I'll leave you with one simple rule, and that is if you're having runaway problems, decompress, add head shims, and if necessary, add nitro to get the horsepower back, or go to a hotter plug in order to get the engine to heat up so that you can go uphill. That will allow you to run the richer needle valve setting that will keep you away from runaway along with the lower compression. It's a simple rule, but that's the problem people have most often when they run into stunt. When they start flying stunt. Now, all of this discussion before I leave it has completely ignored the size of the venturi in the engine. I'm going to assume that for all of these investigations you do, you leave the venturi size alone, and that it's a size that 6 other people who know how to fly have told you works. Okay? That's another variable to play with, and it really adds too many things to discuss in one shot. So who knows, maybe some other day with another installment of Engine Basics we'll talk about that one. Anyway, enjoy and try the experiments, and until then, fly stunt.
I've recently been building an RD1 design for some sport flying fun. And this is a design we published in Flying Models a few years back with a foam wing. Well, I redesigned the airplane with a built-up wing. And it's complete here on the bench, ready for controls. Everything is in, shear webs, spars, cap strips, and everything at 3 1/4 ounces, which is pretty good, I think, for a wing of this size. And I built this in the lost foam system. And although a constant chord wing could just as easily be built really on a flat bench, because there are no tapers to it, and it won't warp if you pin things down evenly and build it on a bench. However, I chose to use the lost foam method. No matter how you build it, you're going to have to make a number of ribs identical. And there's no secret to that. You make a template and you slice the ribs out. That's really an old technique. Some of you may not have seen it in the past, however, and I may have a new twist or two on the technique I'd like to show you now. Okay, what I have here in front of me is a piece of scrap expanded polystyrene foam. This happens to be a piece of 2-pound foam that I use for cutting lost foam wings from, but you could use 3/4 pound or 1 pound per cubic foot density, the normal type of foam used to make foam wings. And the beauty of the styrofoam, or the expanded polystyrene foam, is that it doesn't have any grain structure. And because of that, if you use it as a cutting board, your knife will not be guided by the bench. Normally we cut against a bench or some sort of wooden board, and it has grain structure to it. And the knife blade will tend to follow the grain structure and either go into or away from the template you're trying to cut against. In this case, we're going to cut this piece of 1/16 inch rib stock here, and we're going to take the plywood template that I've made, and you'll notice that this plywood template is pretty much like any other plywood template, except that it has, in this case, a round nose to it, because instead of using a block leading edge, we're going to make a molded leading edge. We have made a molded leading edge for this airplane. And also it has some pushy pins that are hot stuffed. One isn't, but the other two are hot stuffed right to the center line of the rib template. And if you notice, there's also 2 vertical lines here, and they depict the location of the spar. So we can mark out where the spar notches are going to be on this wing. Now, by pushing these pushy pins into the balsa wood and right on into the expanded polystyrene foam, we anchor the template onto the foam cutting board. And now we can take our very sharp number 11 blade knife and we can slice out the rib, and the knife blade won't go dull and it won't be guided by the foam because there's no grain structure to the foam. Now we'll just try to do this in one long, straight, clean shot. Now if you have to take 2 or 3 swipes at it, it's understandable, but there you have one piece of wood with one swipe of the knife blade, and the knife wasn't guided by any grain under the template. So now what we're going to do is cut out the other side. In this case, I'll make 2 shots here because in the nose I ran into a piece of a little bit harder wood. Okay, and now you can see we have the rib cut out. You can actually see it attached here. Before I remove this rib from the template, I just want to make sure this nose is perfectly round, so I just give it a little bit of a hit with the sanding block here. And then I'm going to transfer the position of the spar right onto the top of the ribs. 3/16 apart, and we'll do it at the bottom of the rib. And now we can remove the rib from the template. Now, because there were pushy pin holes in the wing rib, there's an automatic lineup marks for the center line of the rib, and that's what we're going to do now. We're going to describe the center line of the rib in. And oops, that's that. Now we're also going to transfer these tick marks to the face of the rib where the spar location is, top and bottom. And we're going to mark those onto the face of the rib so later on we can cut out the notch top and bottom for the C-tube spars. And again, here we have the completed layout of the rib. Now we're going to want to put some holes in these ribs to allow the lead outs to pass through. Now nominally I start the first hole behind the spar, 1/4 inch behind the spar, and in this rib I think I went back 2.5 inches to the rear of the hole, trying to get out as much weight as possible without making the rib weak. And again, start the forward hole 1/4 inch in front of the spar, and then go 1 3/4 inches. And we have our tick marks now to line up for the holes in the rib. Now to cut those out, I use 2 pieces of metal electrical conduit which have been sharpened in a lathe and have these little plastic handles on them to make them easier to use. One's about, about 1 inch in diameter, and the other one's about 5/8 of an inch in diameter. And I'm going to take the one that's 1 inch in diameter and I'm going to place it on the first tick mark behind the spar, and I'm going to twist it. Of course, it's right on the center line, and there's the plug come out of there. And do the same thing for the first tick mark ahead of the spar. And then I'm going to take the 5/8 inch diameter one and do the rear tick mark behind the spar and the forwardmost tick mark in front of the spar. And as you can see, now we have the holes to start the lead out clearance in the rib. And then we simply connect those holes with a knife blade. Just line them up and connect them. Do the same thing in the front. Turn the rib over. Repeat the process. And pull out the excess wood. And there you have a completed wing rib. The only thing remaining to do again is to put the spar notches in, which we can measure down 3/16 of an inch from the top of the rib and up from the bottom of the rib. Make a mark and cut those out. Using this technique, you can build all of the wing ribs, or make all the wing ribs, for a built-up constant chord wing, like the RD1, in about 2 hours. If you just work very diligently, you can get these done in about 2.5 hours. And they'll all be identical. So again, it's an old technique using a template to cut out ribs, but maybe there's a couple of new twists on that old technique you can pick up here. See you next time.